Roman 10, Address to Working Men by Felix HOLT by George Eliot. Fellow workmen, I am not going to take up your time by complimenting you. It has been the fashion to compliment kings and other authorities when they have come into power, and to tell them that under their wise and beneficent rule happiness would certainly overflow the land, but the end has not always corresponded to that beginning, if it were true that we who work for wages had more of the wisdom and virtue necessary to the right use of power than has been shown by the aristocratic and mercantile classes. We should not glory much in that fact or consider that it carried with it any near approach to infallibility. In my opinion, there has been too much complimenting of that sort, and whenever a speaker, whether he is one of ourselves or not, wastes our time in boasting or flattery, I say let us hiss him if we have the beginning of wisdom, which is to know a little truth about ourselves. We know that as a body we are neither very wise nor very virtuous. And to prove this, I will not point specially to our own habits and doings, but to the general state of the country, any nation that had within it a majority of men, and we are the majority possessed of much wisdom and virtue, would not tolerate the bad practices, the commercial lying and swindling, the poisonous adulteration of goods, the retail cheating and the political bribery, which are carried on boldly in the midst of us. A majority has the power of creating a public opinion. We could groan and hiss before we had the franchise if we had groaned and hissed in the right place, if we had discerned better between good and evil, if the multitude of us artisans and factory hands, and miners and laborers of all sorts, had been skillful, faithful, well-judging, industrious, sober, and I don't see how there can be wisdom and virtue anywhere without these qualities. We should have made an audience that would have shamed the other classes out of their share in the national vices. We should have had better members of Parliament, better religious 276 teachers, honester tradesmen, fewer foolish demagogues, less impudence in infamous and brutal men. And we should not have had among us the abomination of men calling themselves religious, while living in splendor on ill-gotten gains. I say, it is not possible for any society in which there is a very large body of wise and virtuous men to be as vicious as our society is, to have as low a standard of right and wrong, to have so much belief in falsehood, or to have so degrading, barbarous a notion of what pleasure is, or of what justly raises a man above his fellows. Therefore let us have none with this nonsense about our being much better than the rest of our countrymen, or the pretense that that was a reason why we ought to have such an extension of the franchise as has been given to us. The reason for our having the franchise, as I want presently to show, lies somewhere else than in our personal good qualities, and does not in the least lie in any high betting chance that a delegate is a better man than a duke, or that a Sheffield grinder is a better man than any one of the firm he works for. However, we have got our franchise now. We have been sarcastically called in the House of Commons the future masters of the country, and if that sarcasm contains any truth, it seems to me that the first thing we had better think of is our heavy responsibility, that is to say, the terrible risk we run of working mischief and missing good as others have done before us. Suppose certain men, discontented with the irrigation of a country which depended for all its prosperity on the right direction being given to the waters of a great river, had got the management of the irrigation before they were quite sure how exactly it could be altered for the better, or whether they could command the necessary agency for such an alteration. Those men would have a difficult and dangerous business on their hands, and the more sense, feeling, and knowledge they had, the more they would be likely to tremble rather than to triumph. Our situation is not altogether unlike theirs, for general prosperity and well-being is a vast crop that, like the corn in Egypt, can be come at not at all by hurried snatching, but only by a well-judged, patient process. And whether our political power will be any good to us now we have got it must depend entirely on the means and materials. Knowledge, ability, and honesty we have at command. These three things are the only conditions on which we can get any lasting benefit. As every clever workman among us knows, he knows that for an article to be worth much, there must be a good invention or plan to go upon, there must be a well-prepared 277 material, and there must be skillful and honest work in carrying out the plan and by this test. We may try those who want to be our leaders. Have they anything to offer us besides indignant talk? When they tell us we ought to have this, that, or the other thing, can they explain to us any reasonable, fair, safe way of getting it? Can they argue in favor of a particular change by showing us pretty closely how the change is likely to work? I don't want to decry a just indignation. On the contrary, I should like it to be more thorough and general. A wise man more than 2,000 years ago, when he was asked what would most tend to lessen injustice in the world, said, "If every bystander felt as indignant at a wrong as if he himself were the sufferer, let us cherish such indignation." But the long-growing evils of a great nation are a tangled business, asking for a good deal more than indignation in order to be got rid of. Indignation is a fine warhorse, but the warhorse must be ridden by a man. It must be ridden by rationality, skill, courage, armed with the right weapons, and taking definite aim. We have reason to be discontented with many things, and looking back either through the history of England to much earlier generations, or to the legislation and administrations of later times, we are justified in saying that many of the evils under which our country now suffers are the consequences of folly, ignorance, neglect, or self-seeking in those who at different times have wielded the powers of rank, office, and money. But the more bitterly we feel this, the more loudly we utter it, the stronger is the obligation we lay on ourselves to beware lest we also, by a too hasty resting of measures, which seem to promise an immediate partial relief, make a worse time of it for our own generation, and leave a bad inheritance to our children. The deepest curse of wrongdoing, whether of the foolish or wicked sort, is that its effects are difficult to be undone. I suppose there is hardly anything more to be shuddered at than that part of the history of disease which shows how, when a man injures his constitution by a life of vicious excess, his children and grandchildren inherit diseased bodies and minds, and how the effects of that unhappy inheritance continue to spread beyond our calculation. This is only one example of the law by which human lives are linked together, another example of what we complain of when we point to our pauperism, to the brutal ignorance of multitudes among our fellow countrymen, to the weight of taxation laid on us by blamable wars, to the wasteful channels made for the P278 public money, to the expense and trouble of getting justice, and call these the effects of bad rule. This is the law that we all bear the yoke of, the law of no man's making, and which no man can undo. Everybody now sees an example of it. In the case of Ireland, we who are living now are sufferers by the wrongdoing of those who lived before us. We are the sufferers by each other's wrongdoing, and the children who come after us are and will be sufferers from the same causes. Will any man say he doesn't care for that? Allow it is nothing to him. What he wants is to better himself. With what face, then, will he complain of any injury if he says that in politics or in any sort of social action he will not care to know what are likely to be the consequences to others besides himself? He is defending the very worst doings that have brought about his discontent. He might as well say that there is no better rule needful for men than that each should tug and drive for what will please him, without caring how that tugging will act on the fine widespread network of society in which he is fast meshed. If any man taught that as a doctrine, we should know him for a fool, but there are men who act upon it. Every scoundrel, for example, whether he is a rich religious scoundrel who lies and cheats on a large scale, and will perhaps come and ask you to send him to Parliament, or a poor pocket-picking scoundrel who will steal your loose pence while you are listening round the platform, none of us are so ignorant as not to know that a society, a nation, is held together by just the opposite doctrine, and action be the dependence of men on each other, and the sense they have of a common interest in preventing injury. And we working men are, I think, of all classes the last that can afford to forget this, for if we did, we should be much like sailors cutting away the timbers of our own ship to warm our grog with. For what else is the meaning of our trades unions? What else is the meaning of every flag we carry, every procession we make, every crowd we collect for the sake of making some protest on behalf of our body as receivers of wages, if not this, that it is our interest to stand by each other, and that this being the common interest, no one of us will try to make a good bargain for himself without considering what will be good for his fellows, and every member of a union believes that the wider he can spread his union, the stronger and surer will be the effect of it, so I think I shall be borne out in saying that a working man who can put 2 and 2 together, or take 3 from 4 and see what will be the remainder, can understand that a society to be well off must be p. 279, made up chiefly of men who consider the general good as well as their own. Well, but taking the world as it is, and this is one way we must take it, when we want to find out how it can be improved. No society is made up of a single class. Society stands before us like that wonderful piece of life, the human body with all its various parts, depending on one another, and with a terrible liability to get wrong because of that delicate dependence. We all know how many diseases the human body is apt to suffer from, and how difficult it is even for the doctors to find out exactly where the seat or beginning of the disorder is. That is because the body is made up of so many various parts, all related to each other, or likely all to feel the effect if any one of them goes wrong. It is somewhat the same with our old nations or societies. No society ever stood long in the world without getting to be composed of different classes. Now it is all pretense to say that there is no such thing as class interest. It is clear that if any particular number of men get a particular benefit from any existing institution, they are likely to band together in order to keep up that benefit and increase it, until it is perceived to be unfair and injurious to another large number who get knowledge and strength enough to set up a resistance. And this again has been part of the history of every great society since history began, but the simple reason for this being that any large body of men is likely to have more of stupidity, narrowness, and greed than of farsightedness and generosity. It is plain that the number who resist unfairness and injury are in danger of becoming injurious in their turn, and in this way a justifiable resistance has become a damaging convulsion, making everything worse instead of better. This has been seen so often that we ought to profit a little by the experience. So long as there is selfishness in men, so long as they have not found out for themselves institutions which express and carry into practice the truth that the highest interest of mankind must at last be a common and not a divided interest, so long as the gradual operation of steady causes has not made that truth a part of every man's knowledge and feeling. Just as we now not only know that it is good for our health to be cleanly, but feel that cleanliness is only another word for comfort, which is the underside or lining of all pleasure, so long, I say, as men wink at their own knowingness, or hold their heads high because they have got an advantage over their fellows, so long class interest will be in danger of making itself felt injuriously. p. 280. No set of men will get any sort of power without being in danger of wanting more than their right share. But on the other hand, it is just as certain that no set of men will get angry at having less than their right share, and set up a claim on that ground without falling into just the same danger of exacting too much. And exacting it in wrong ways, it's human nature we have got to work with all round, and nothing else. That seems like saying something very commonplace, nay, obvious, as if one should say that where there are hands there are mouths, yet to hear a good deal of the speechifying, and to see a good deal of the action that go forward, one might suppose it was forgotten. But I come back to this, that in our old society there are old institutions, and among them the various distinctions and inherited advantages of classes, which have shaped themselves along with all the wonderful slow-growing system of things made up of our laws, our commerce, and our stores of all sorts, whether in material objects such as buildings and machinery, or in knowledge such as scientific thought and professional skill, just as in that case I spoke of before. The irrigation of a country, which must absolutely have its water distributed, or it will bear no crop. There are the old channels, the old banks, and the old pumps, which must be used as they are until new and better have been prepared, or the structure of the old has been gradually altered. But it would be fool's work to batter down a pump, only because a better might be made. When you had no machinery ready for a new one, it would be wicked work if villages lost their crops by it. Now the only safe way by which society can be steadily improved, and our worst evils reduced, is not by any attempt to do away directly with the actually existing class distinctions and advantages, as if everybody could have the same sort of work, or lead the same sort of life, which none of my hearers are stupid enough to suppose, but by the turning of class interests into class functions or duties, What I mean is that each class should be urged by the surrounding conditions to perform its particular work under the strong pressure of responsibility to the nation at large, that our public affairs should be got into a state in which there should be no impunity for foolish or faithless conduct. In this way, the public judgment would sift out incapability and dishonesty from posts of high charge, and even personal ambition would necessarily become of a worthier sort, since the desires of the most selfish men must be a good deal shaped by the opinions of those around them. And for p. 280, one person to put on a cap and bells, or to go about dishonest or paltry ways of getting rich, that he may spend a vast sum of money in having more finery than his neighbors, he must be pretty sure of a crowd who will applaud him. Now changes can only be good in proportion as they help to bring about this sort of result, in proportion as they put knowledge in the place of ignorance and fellow-feeling in the place of selfishness. In the course of that substitution, class distinctions must inevitably change their character and represent the varying duties of men, not their varying interests. But this end will not come by impatience. Day will not break the sooner because we get up before the twilight, still less will it come by mere undoing or change, merely as change. And moreover, if we believed that it would be unconditionally hastened by our getting the franchise, we should be what I call superstitious men, believing in magic, or the production of a result by hocus pocus. Our getting the franchise will greatly hasten that good end in proportion only as every one of us has the knowledge, the foresight, the conscience that will make him well-judging and scrupulous in the use of it. The nature of things in this world has been determined for us beforehand, and in such a way that no ship can be expected to sail well on a difficult voyage and reach the right port unless it is well manned. The nature of the winds and the waves of the timbers, the sails, and the cordage will not accommodate itself to drunken, mutinous sailors. You will not suspect me of wanting to preach any cant to you, or of joining in the pretense that everything is in a fine way and need not be made better. What I am striving to keep in our minds is the care, the precaution with which we should go about making things better, so that the public order may not be destroyed, so that no fatal shock may be given to this society of ours, this living body in which our lives are bound up. After the Reform Bill of 1832, I was in an election riot, which showed me clearly on a small scale what public disorder must always be, and I have never forgotten that the riot was brought about chiefly by the agency of dishonest men who professed to be on the people's side. Now the danger hanging over change is great just in proportion as it tends to produce such disorder by giving any large number of ignorant men whose notions of what is good are of a low and brutal sort the belief that they have got power into their hands and may do pretty much as they like. If anyone can look round us and say that he sees no signs of any such danger p. 282 now, and that our national condition is running along like a clear broadening stream, safe not to get choked with mud, I call him a cheerful man. Perhaps he does his own gardening and seldom take an exercise far away from home. To us who have no gardens and often walk abroad, it is plain that we can never get into a bit of a crowd, but we must rub clothes with a set of roughs who have the worst vices of the worst, rich who are gamblers, sots, libertines, knaves, or else mere sensual simpletons and victims. They are the ugly crop that has sprung up while the stewards have been sleeping. They are the multiplying brood begotten by parents who have been left without all teaching, save that of a too craving body, without all well-being save the fading delusions of drugged beer and gin. They are the hideous margin of society at one edge, drawing toward it the undesigning ignorant poor at the other, darkening imperceptibly into the lowest criminal class. Here is one of the evils which cannot be got rid of quickly, and against which any of us who have got sense, decency, and instruction have need to watch, that these degraded fellowmen could really get the mastery in a persistent disobedience to the laws, and in a struggle to subvert order. I do not believe, but wretched calamities must come from the very beginning of such a struggle, and the continuance of it would be a civil war in which the inspiration on both sides might soon cease to be even a false notion of good, and might become the direct savage impulse of ferocity. We have all to see to it that we do not help to rouse what I may call the savage beast in the breasts of our generation, that we do not help to poison the nation's blood and make richer provision for bestiality to come. We know well enough that oppressors have sinned in this way, that oppression has notoriously made men mad, and we are determined to resist oppression but let us if possible show that we can keep sane in our resistance, and shape our means more and more reasonably toward the least harmful, and therefore the speediest attainment of our end. Let us, I say, show that our spirits are too strong to be driven mad, but can keep that sober determination which alone gives mastery over. The adaptation of means, and a first guarantee of this sanity, will be to act as if we understood that the fundamental duty of a government is to preserve order, to enforce obedience of the laws. It has been held hitherto that a man can be depended on as a guardian of order only when he has much money and comfort to lose, but a better state of things would be that men who had little money and not much comfort, p. 283, should still be guardians of order, because they had sense to see that disorder would do no good, and had a heart of justice, pity, and fortitude to keep them from making more misery only because they felt some misery themselves. There are thousands of artisans who have already shown this fine spirit, and have endured much with patient heroism. If such a spirit spread and penetrated us, all we should soon become the masters of the country in the best sense and to the best ends. For the public order being preserved, there can be no government in future that will not be determined by our insistence on our fair and practicable demands. It is only by disorder that our demands will be choked, that we shall find ourselves lost among a brutal rabble, with all the intelligence of the country opposed to us, and see government in the shape of guns that will sweep us down in the ignoble martyrdom of fools. It has been a too common notion that to insist much on the preservation of order is the part of a selfish aristocracy and a selfish commercial class, because among these in the nature of things have been found the opponents of change. I am a radical, and what is more, I am not a radical with a title or a French cook or even an entrance into fine society. I expect great changes, and I desire them, but I don't expect them to come in a hurry by mere inconsiderate sweeping. A Hercules with a big besom is a fine thing for a filthy stable, but not for weeding a seedbed where his besom would soon make a barren floor. That is old-fashioned talk, someone may say. We know all that. Yes, when things are put in an extreme way, most people think they know them. But after all, they are comparatively few who see the small degrees by which those extremes are arrived at, or have the resolution and self-control to resist the little impulses by which they creep on surely toward a fatal end. Does anybody set out meaning to ruin himself, or to drink himself to death, or to waste his life, so that he becomes a despicable old man, a superannuated nuisance, like a fly in winter? Yet there are plenty of whose lot this is the pitiable story. Well, now, supposing us all to have the best intentions, we working men, as a body, run some risk of bringing evil on the nation, in that unconscious manner, half hurrying, half pushed, in a jostling march toward an end we are not thinking of, for just as there are many things which we know better and feel much more strongly than the richer, softer-handed classes can know or feel them, so there are many things, many p. 284 precious benefits which we, by the very fact of our privations, our lack of leisure and instruction, are not so likely to be aware of and take into our account. Those precious benefits form a chief part of what I may call the common estate of society, a wealth over and above buildings, machinery, produce, shipping, and so on, though closely connected with these, a wealth of a more delicate kind that we may more unconsciously bring into danger, doing harm, and not knowing that we do it. I mean that treasure of knowledge, science, poetry, refinement of thought, feeling, and manners, great memories, and the interpretation of great records, which is carried on from the minds of one generation to the minds of another. This is something distinct from the indulgences of luxury and the pursuit of vain finery, and one of the hardships in the lot of working men is that they have been for the most part shut out from sharing in this treasure. It can make a man's life very great, very full of delight, though he has no smart furniture and no horses. It also yields a great deal of discovery that corrects error, and of invention that lessens bodily pain, and must at least make life easier for all. Now, the security of this treasure demands not only the preservation of order, but a certain patience on our part with many institutions and facts of various kinds, especially touching the accumulation of wealth, which from the light we stand in, we are more likely to discern the evil than the good of it is. Constantly the task of practical wisdom, not to say this is good and I will have it, but to say this is the less of two unavoidable evils, and I will bear it, and this treasure of knowledge, which consists in the fine activity The exalted vision of many minds is bound up at present with conditions which have much evil in them. Just as in the case of material wealth and its distribution, we are obliged to take the selfishness and weaknesses of human nature into account, and however we insist that men might act better, are forced, unless we are fanatical simpletons, to consider how they are likely to act so in this matter of the wealth that is carried in men's minds. We have to reflect that the two absolute predominance of a class whose wants have been of a common sort, who are chiefly struggling to get better and more food, clothing, shelter, and bodily recreation, may lead to hasty measures for the sake of having things more fairly shared, which, even if they did not fail of their object, would at last debase the life of the nation. Do anything which will throw the classes who hold the treasures of knowledge, nay, I may say the treasure of refined p. 285 Nidcinto, the background caused them to withdraw from public affairs, stop too suddenly any of the sources by which their leisure and ease are furnished, rob them of the chances by which they may be influential and preeminent, and you do something as short-sighted as the acts of France and Spain, when in jealousy and wrath not altogether unprovoked they drove from among them races and classes that held the traditions of handicraft and agriculture. You injure your own inheritance, and the inheritance of your children. You may truly say that this which I call the common estate of society has been anything but common to you, but the same may be said by many of us of the sunlight and the air of the sky and the fields of parks and holiday games. Nevertheless, that these blessings exist makes life worthier to us, and urges us the more to energetic likely means of getting our share in them. And I say, let us watch carefully lest we do anything to lessen this treasure which is held in the minds of men, while we exert ourselves first of all, and to the very utmost, that we and our children may share in all its benefits. Yes, exert ourselves to the utmost to break the yoke of ignorance. If we demand more leisure, more ease in our lives, let us show that we don't deserve the reproach of wanting to shirk that industry, which in some form or other every man, whether rich or poor, should feel himself as much bound to as he is bound to decency. Let us show that we want to have some time and strength left to us, that we may use it not for brutal indulgence, but for the rational exercise of the faculties which make us men. Without this, no political measures can benefit us, no political institution will alter the nature of ignorance or hinder it from producing vice and misery. Let ignorance start how it will, it must run the same round of low appetites, poverty, slavery, and superstition. Some of us know this well, nay, I will say feel it, for knowledge of this kind cuts deep, and to us it is one of the most painful facts belonging to our condition that there are numbers of our fellow workmen who are so far from feeling in the same way that they never use the imperfect opportunities already offered them for giving their children some schooling, but turn their little ones of tender age into breadwinners, often at cruel tasks, exposed to the horrible infection of childish vice. Of course, the causes of these hideous things go a long way back. Parents' misery has made parents' wickedness, but we who are still blessed with the hearts of fathers and the consciences of men, we who have some knowledge of the curse entailed on broods of creatures in p. 286 human shape, whose enfeebled bodies and dull perverted minds are mere centers of uneasiness, in whom even appetite is feeble and joy impossible. I say we are bound to use all the means at our command to help in putting a stop to this horror. Here it seems to me is a way in which we may use extended cooperation among us to the most momentous of all purposes, and make conditions of enrollment that would strengthen all educational measures. It is true enough that there is a low sense of parental duties in the nation at large, and that numbers who have no excuse in bodily hardship seem to think it a light thing to beget children, to bring human beings with all their tremendous possibilities into this difficult world, and then take little heed how they are disciplined and furnished for the perilous journey they are sent on without any asking of their own. This is a sin shared in more or less by all classes, but there are sins which, like taxation, fall the heaviest on the poorest, and none have such galling reasons as we working men to try and rouse to the utmost the feeling of responsibility in fathers and mothers. We have been urged into cooperation by the pressure of common demands. In war, men need each other more, and where a given point has to be defended, fighters inevitably find themselves shoulder to shoulder. So fellowship grows, so grow the rules of fellowship. which gradually shape themselves to thoroughness. As the idea of a common good becomes more complete, we feel a right to say, if you will be one of us, you must make such and such a contribution, you must renounce such and such a separate advantage, you must set your face against such and such an infringement. If we have any false ideas about our common good, our rules will be wrong, and we shall be cooperating to damage each other. But now here is a part of our good, without which everything else we strive for will be worthless. I mean the rescue of our children. Let us demand from the members of our unions that they fulfill their duty as parents in this definite matter, which rules can reach. Let us demand that they send their children to school so as not to go on recklessly breeding a moral pestilence among us, just as strictly as we demand that they pay their contributions to a common fund, understood to be for a common benefit. While we watch our public men, let us watch one another as to this duty, which is also public and more momentous even than obedience to sanitary regulations, while we resolutely declare against the wickedness in high places. Let us set ourselves also against the wickedness in low places, not quarreling, which came first, p. 287, or which is the worse of the two-note, trying to settle the miserable precedents of plague or famine, but insisting unflinchingly on remedies once ascertained, and summoning those who hold the treasure of knowledge to remember that they hold it in trust, and that with them lies the task of searching for new remedies and finding the right methods of applying them. To find right remedies and right methods here is the great function of knowledge. Here the life of one man may make a fresh error straight away, in which a sort of suffering that has existed shall exist no more for the thousands of years down to the middle of the 16th century, that human limbs had been hacked and amputated. Nobody knew how to stop the bleeding, except by searing the ends of the vessels with red-hot iron. But then came a man named Ambrose Pare, and said, tie up the arteries. That was a fine word to utter. It contained the statement of a method, a plan, by which a particular evil was forever assuaged. Let us try to discern the men whose words carry that sort of kernel, and choose such men to be our guides and representatives, not choose platform swaggerers who bring us nothing but the ocean to make our broth with. To get the chief power into the hands of the wisest, which means to get our life regulated according to the truest principles mankind is in possession of, is a problem as old as the very notion of wisdom. The solution comes slowly, because men collectively can only be made to embrace principles and to act on them by the slow, stupendous teaching of the world's events. Men will go on planting potatoes and nothing else but potatoes till a potato disease comes and forces them to find out the advantage of a varied crop. Selfishness, stupidity, sloth persist in trying to adapt the world to their desires, till a time comes when the world manifests itself as too decidedly inconvenient to them. Wisdom stands outside of man and urges itself upon him like the marks of the changing seasons. Before it finds a home within him, directs his actions, and from the precious effects of obedience begets a corresponding love. But while still outside of us, wisdom often looks terrible and wears strange forms wrapped in the changing conditions of a struggling world. It wears now the form of wants, and just demands in a great multitude of British men, wants and demands urged into existence by the forces of a maturing world, and it is in virtue of this presence, p. 288 of wisdom on our side, as a mighty fact, physical and moral, which must enter into and shape the thoughts and actions of mankind, that we working men have obtained the suffrage, not because we are an excellent multitude, but because we are a needy multitude. But now for our own part, we have seriously to consider this outside wisdom, which lies in the supreme unalterable nature of things, and watch to give it a home within us and obey it. If the claims of the unendowed multitude of working men hold within them principles which must shape the future, it is not less true that the endowed classes in their inheritance from the past hold the precious material without which no worthy, noble future can be molded. Many of the highest uses of life are in their keeping, and if privilege has often been abused, it has also been the nurse of excellence. Here again, we have to submit ourselves to the great law of inheritance. If we quarrel with the way in which the labors and earnings of the past have been preserved and handed down, we are just as bigoted, just as narrow, just as wanting in that religion which keeps an open ear and an obedient mind to the teachings of fact, as we accuse those of being who quarrel with the new truths and new needs which are disclosed in the present, the deeper insight we get into the causes of human trouble, and the ways by which men are made better and happier, the less we shall be inclined to the unprofitable spirit and practice of reproaching classes. As such, in a wholesale fashion, not all the evils of our condition are such as we can justly blame others for, and I repeat, many of them are such as no changes of institutions can quickly remedy, to discern between the evils that energy can remove and the evils that patience must bear makes the difference between manliness and childishness, between good sense and folly. And more than that, without such discernment, seeing that we have grave duties toward our own body and the country at large, we can hardly escape acts of fatal rashness and injustice. I am addressing a mixed assembly of workmen, and some of you may be as well or better fitted than I am to take up this office, but they will not think it amiss in me that I have tried to bring together the considerations most likely to be of service to us in preparing ourselves for the use of our new opportunities. I have avoided touching on special questions. The best help toward judging well on these is to approach them in the right temper, without vain expectation, and with a resolution which is mixed with temperance.